Today we're going to get into the first verse of the book of Proverbs. Before I do that, there's one thing I wanted to make a slight correction to. Judy pointed out to me about the word discretion in the first study, and then I forgot to mention it last Wednesday. But I used the primary definition of discretion, which is the action of separating or distinguishing. And then she mentioned about how sometimes when we think about discretion, we think of like somebody that can makes wise and good decisions and is a discreet person. And so I looked back in the OED, and when there's a third primary definition, and that is, it basically takes the primary definition and then makes a specific application of it. And this is what we typically think of when we think of the word discretion. It is ability to discern or distinguish, which is exactly what the primary definition is, to discern or distinguish. But it's the ability to discern or distinguish what is right, befitting, or advisable, especially as regards one's own conduct or action. The quality of being discreet, discernment, prudence, sagacity, circumspection, sound judgment. So a lot of times that's what happens with secondary or tertiary definitions, is they will expand upon the primary definition, and that's what the case is here. So it is still the action of separating or distinguishing, but it's separating or distinguishing good courses of action versus bad courses of action, or good conduct versus bad conduct or something. And
it's like sorting it out and then applying the wisest.
Yes, exactly.
Making the best decision what to do with it.
Yep, that's right. Okay, so with that, let's get on to Proverbs 1 and verse 1. I'm hoping to cover 3 verses of Proverbs tonight. So Proverbs 1 and verse 1 says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel." So let's just start at the very beginning. And this verse here identifies who the author of the book of Proverbs is, and that is Solomon, who was the son of David, king of Israel. So Solomon would have been the third king of Israel. You had Saul, and then David, and then Solomon it was passed down to. And he is identified here as the author. A proverb is a short, pithy saying, in common or recognized use, a concise sentence, often metaphorical or alliterative in form, which is held to express some truth ascertained by experience or observation and familiar to all, an adage, a wise saw. So if you think about it, in that a proverb is a short, wise saying, which is basically what the definition is, then the author of it must also be wise. You can't come up with a wise saying unless you're a wise man, right? So then if we think about who's the wisest man in the Bible, except for the Lord Jesus Christ, we'll get to that in a second, we know that it's Solomon. And he got this wisdom from God whenever God asked him what he wanted from the Lord. And Solomon asked for wisdom. We look in 1 Kings 3, 9 through 11. This decision in Solomon's life, in the beginning of his reign, is what made him qualified to write the book of Proverbs. He would not have been able to write this just with his own smarts. It was God gave him exceeding wisdom. Because if you think about it, maybe each one of us is, if we're lucky, has thought about 1 or 2 cute little sayings or something. But for the most part, we read neat sayings like that and we think, yeah, that's true. It resonates. But we usually don't think of them very often. Once in a while, we come up with one that might be original, maybe. And like I thought of one a few years ago, that it's better to make a difference than a fortune. And as far as I know, that was an original thought, right? So that could be a proverb, right? But okay, so I've been around for 36 years and I've thought of maybe 1 or 2 or something like that. Solomon's thought of thousands of them and just rolling them off his tongue one after the other.
You have to be pretty wise to ask for wisdom instead of that other stuff.
That's right.
So you had to be pretty wise anyway. He
started off from a good place,
yeah.
And to whom much is given, then much more will be committed to him. So 1 Kings 3, 9 through 11. This is Solomon's answer to the Lord. "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, or hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. So Solomon got the wisdom that he asked for, and he also got the other stuff that he didn't ask for as well, because he ended up being an extremely wealthy man. And he got the riches and the long life and all those things. Unfortunately, he kind of blew it at the end of his life and lost most of the wisdom that he got. He ended up becoming an idolater, which is, I guess, something we should all take heed to. So because of this, like we just read there in verse 12, God gave him a wise and understanding heart that would never be equaled until the Lord Jesus Christ came. But with the exception of the Lord Jesus Christ, Solomon's wisdom was unparalleled. If you turn over a verse to 1 Kings 4, 29 through 31, it says, And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. So that's a lot of wisdom, right? I mean, pretty much that's innumerable. We can't count the sand in the sea. Solomon's wisdom was likewise innumerable. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country, and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Maho. And his fame was in all nations round about, and he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. So, incredibly wise. Wiser than anybody else. We read whenever Christ was born that wise men, or a couple of years after Christ was born, wise men came from the east. Right? The people in the east were known for their wisdom, and it says there that Solomon was even wiser than they were. There's only one exception to that. One person was wiser than Solomon, and that is God manifest in the flesh, the Lord Jesus Christ, in Luke chapter 11 and verse 31. Luke 11 and verse 31. It says, The queen of the south shall rise up in judgment with the men of this generation, and condemn them. The queen of the south was the queen of Sheba that came to see Solomon's wisdom. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. And of course he's referring to himself. And it's interesting here, Jesus says here that he's greater than Solomon. He says in the next verse, he's greater than Jonas. There's another place where he said that his witness was greater than that of John the Baptist. It says in Hebrews that he's greater than Moses. He's the woman at Samaria at the well said, Art thou greater than our father Jacob? And clearly his answer was, without saying it, yes, I am. Jacob gave you some wet water. I give you water that you'll never thirst again when you drink it. So on and on and on, they asked if he was greater than Abraham. Art thou greater than Abraham? He says, before Abraham was, I am. So he's greater than all of the greatest men in the Old Testament. He truly is the greatest man that ever lived. So we saw there in 1 Kings 4 and verse 32 that Solomon spake 3,000 proverbs. Now, if you consider that there are only 915 verses in the book of Proverbs, and that the actual Proverbs start in chapter 10, and really and I didn't mention this the other night, but then they end in chapter 29. So really the Proverbs per se are from chapter 10 to chapter 29. 30 and 31 are not really Proverbs in the sense of a short pithy saying. So really you only have there, not maybe two-thirds of the book of Proverbs, so maybe roughly 600 or so, something like that. So you get 600 Proverbs, and he spake 3,000. Right? So there's 5 times as many Proverbs out there somewhere that aren't recorded that Solomon spake. So that's quite impressive if you think about it. Okay, so let's move on to Proverbs 1 and verse 2. Just a minute here. I want to grab a pen.